Dua Lipa's Radical Optimism era has not nearly matched the success of the Future Nostalgia era, which had multiple hit singles and lasted for years. And I think the Barbie film played a big role in this happening. Before I get into that, hello Floppianas. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Adam the Flop, and I am obsessed with talking about pop music. So if you consider yourself a pop music stan, definitely subscribe for more content like this. I'm really excited to get back into long form content this year, and I feel like I finally figured out how exactly I want to do that. And what better way to start than by talking about the underrated flop era Radical Optimism by Dua Lipa. I think this era underperforming was due to three main things: the rollout, the post-release marketing, and the confusing creative direction. But it all started with the Barbie movie. First, let's talk a little bit about why Future Nostalgia, the album Dua released before Radical Optimism, was such a big era. Because when you have a big era like that, your next album is bound to be compared to that, which sucks, but it's inevitable.
Terrible, but inevitable?
If you remember Dua's first album era, she had multiple hit singles, but was definitely lacking the stage presence. I mean, there was that whole viral meme of the comments saying, "I love her lack of energy. Go girl, give us nothing." And for the Future Nostalgia era, Dua did the best thing a pop girl receiving hate can do, which is learn from that criticism and then make the haters gagged with your comeback. She started the Future Nostalgia era in 2019 with the release of Don't Start Now, and instantly showed people that she learned how to dance and started incorporating choreography and energy into her performances. So that was a great start to the era, but Dua really shined after this album came out. Although Don't Start Now was already a big hit before the album came out, Future Nostalgia was kind of set up for failure because it leaked a month before its release. And you guys, it was actually so sad. Like, Dua was crying on Instagram Live. She ended up changing the whole release date, and it was just a tragedy. And to just make things worse, this was in March 2020, which was the start of the COVID lockdown. So it really seemed like there was no saving the Future Nostalgia era. However, the whole reason why Future Nostalgia became so big was that Dua did not give up on the album after all these horrible things were happening. While most of us were laying in our beds during the lockdown, Dua Lipa was booked and busy doing every single virtual performance you could think of. And she was also dropping remixes and new versions of the album, which resulted in her getting even more hits like Levitating, Love Again, and We're Good. The Future Nostalgia era officially ended in 2023 when the tour ended, meaning this era lasted 4 years, which during the streaming era, that is unheard of. I mentioned how Dua started the Future Nostalgia era perfectly because she did something different by releasing a disco pop song with choreo. And what I think went wrong with the start of the Radical Optimism era was that it didn't feel like there was a strong contrast from Future Nostalgia, especially because Dua's next solo single after Future Nostalgia was yet another disco song, Dance the Night, from the Barbie soundtrack. I know this song was just a Barbie soundtrack and not part of Radical Optimism, but I think a big reason for Radical Optimism's underperformance was Dance the Night's success. I'm not saying Dua shouldn't have done this track. In fact, I think she was the perfect artist for it. I mean, it's a disco pop song, and Dua has been the queen of disco pop in the 2020s, so what better artist to sing this song than Dua Lipa? But this song is what ultimately ruined the hype for Radical Optimism. Dance the Night ended up becoming a huge sleeper hit, reaching the top 10 months after its release, and it just kept smashing throughout 2023, which was due to the Barbie movie just taking over that year and the song being part of one of the most iconic scenes in the movie when Barbie's doing her big blowout party. So the song did its thing, it became a smash hit, and then right after the song peaked, Dua started teasing her next album era by blacking out her Instagram and then coming back with a photo that said, "Miss me?" This strategy of artists blacking out their Instagrams and then coming back as they're about to start their new album eras is way too overdone, and in my opinion only works when the general public genuinely misses you and is wondering where you are. Like, think Taylor Swift disappearing from the public eye for a whole year and a half and then coming back to Instagram with these cryptic snake visuals to tease reputation. Like, that had everyone tuned in. I feel like Dua Lipa is similar to Adele in the way that if I were to stop someone on the street and ask them who they stan, they probably wouldn't say Adele, but if I asked them if they liked Adele, they'd be like, duh, everyone likes Adele. But then there's artists like Taylor Swift and Beyonce who have big enough cult fandoms that will get their music to #1 no matter what. But for an artist like Dua Lipa, who might not have a huge cult fan base, but is definitely loved by the general public and is starting a new album era, it is so important that the general public genuinely craves new music from her, which I feel like was not the case when she was starting Radical Optimism, because Dance the Night was literally just everywhere. And then her wiping her Instagram feed and then posting a picture that said "miss me" just felt weird, because it's not like she wasn't active on social media. You know, she was showing us every week what new vacation she was on, which love that for her, but there just wasn't necessarily a high demand for new music from her just yet. Now, she and her team probably didn't know how big Dance the Night was going to be, because it was just a soundtrack song, and by the time it became a hit, she likely had already planned the release of the lead single Houdini and didn't want to delay anything. But when Dua released Houdini in November of 2023, Dance the Night was still charting. In fact, there was a point when Dance the Night was charting higher than Houdini. So it was kind of overshadowing this new era that Dua was starting. It just felt kind of messy, and it honestly felt like Dua had two different songs from two different eras at once, because Dance the Night was a disco song and could have been a future nostalgia track. There just wasn't enough time between the two songs for there to be a clear differentiation between the two eras. Now, Houdini is definitely not a complete flop. I mean, it has over 700 million Spotify streams and almost debuted in the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, but at the end of the day, Dance the Night ended up outcharting all of the singles off of Radical Optimism: Houdini, Training Season, and Illusion. Now we're going to get into the second part of why this era underperformed, which in my opinion was due to the sudden change in creative direction and the lack of post-release marketing. So Dua released Radical Optimism right before summer 2024, and by that time it had been 6 months since the release of Houdini, and neither of the two follow-up singles were really taking off. I think that's why there was such a big shift in the creative direction from the kaleidoscope aesthetic she was teasing at the start of the era to the summery visuals she introduced with the album cover, the Illusion music video, and the merch. Her team probably thought that having a summery album with summer visuals would get more people tuned in, but honestly, she should have just stuck with that kaleidoscope aesthetic, because it genuinely was a cool, fresh idea that no other pop girl was doing. And then to add on to the confusion of the creative direction, when she started the tour, the summer visuals were nowhere to be seen. And touring is the time to showcase your whole entire era to your fans. It's really important for artists to have a strong creative direction with their albums if they want their eras to last long, because that is what gets fans to feel like they're in the world of your album. The creative direction for Future Nostalgia, like everything from the visuals to Dua's styling went along with the album title and the album cover, but the creative direction for Radical Optimism just felt off. Had she started the album era in the summer and then continued with the summery visuals, I think it could have been more successful, but because there was so much time between Houdini and the release of the album, and then there was the sudden change in the creative direction, it just didn't feel like we were in an album era. Something I feel like too many artists do nowadays is just give up on their albums after they flop. Like, it's actually crazy to think we were in a whole pandemic and Dua was promoting the shit out of Future Nostalgia, and when it came to Radical Optimism, crickets. Radical Optimism ended up departing the Billboard 200 after only 15 weeks, making it Dua's shortest running album. In comparison, Future Nostalgia is still charting after 5 years, and her first album charted for 97 weeks. This album might not necessarily be a flop, because sure, the singles have decent streaming numbers, but when you compare it to Future Nostalgia and her first album, it definitely is her flop era, which is sad because Future Nostalgia was so big, and as a supporter of Dua Lipa, I just want to see her getting bigger and bigger. It's just crazy that Dance the Night ended up becoming a bigger hit than any single off of Radical Optimism. And if there was more time between that song and the start of this era, and also more post-release marketing and a strong creative direction, I think it would have been so much more successful. But nonetheless, Dua is still a main pop girl. And do I think that Radical Optimism will ruin her career? No, like, she can easily learn from this and come back strong with her next era. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you want more content like this, definitely subscribe for more and check out my short form content on my other social media profiles.